Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Well, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Francisco Gonzalez, and I'm really thrilled and honored today to have Luke Mickelson as our guest today on this episode. Luke, just want to say welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Man, thanks for having me, Francisco. This is great.
Well, Luke, I first heard you on one of my favorite podcasts, Mike Rowe, and that was almost 4 years ago. And so what an honor to have you here. And I know you are the founder of Sleep in Heavenly Peace, where your nonprofit organization that you started basically, builds and provides beds for just thousands of kids across the country. We're going to get into the story and how it evolved and actually how many people you're reaching and how many volunteers you have, because I know it's continuing to grow. But what a great, cause in terms of kids who people, a lot of us, we live in the wealthiest country in the world, at a time of one of the greatest times of prosperity, but there are still a lot of kids in our own country who don't even have a bed to sleep on. So I know you've done incredible work there. We want to get into that story. I also know you also do some coaching, and that's great because, first of all, I lead a company called Fearless Journeys as well, where we do some group coaching. And I know there's a lot of people listening to this that are always looking for people to help them in different ways. And even people in Fearless Journeys, some of them even have their own other, coaching things they do for their specific needs. So perhaps you'll gain some followers here in that realm as well. But just wanted to again say welcome. And but most importantly, Luke, the way to introduce you is you're just a farm kid from Idaho. And if you could do all these incredible things,
mic drop.
Who can't?
That's good.
So tell us about being a farm kid from Idaho. Tell us about the early days of Luke Mickelson.
Yeah, thanks. And you're right, man. I'm just a farm kid from Idaho. And I say that, Francisco, and you've kind of hit a little bit of the nail on the head when people see you or me or whoever on a podcast or a TV show or whatever, they instantly, I do the same, right? We instantly put them on some sort of pedestal, like they know so much more than we do, and they probably in some places do. But I'm just telling you, listen, I tell people I'm the farm kid from Idaho because this started by some dude, and that means anybody can do and make a difference in people's lives. And that's what I hope to share today. Part of my message is, that if a farm kid from Idaho can do it, anybody can. It doesn't take a Harvard grad or years and years of experience. It just takes an open heart, willing to make mistakes and move forward and learn from other people, and you can make a big difference. And I think I developed this kind of the start of the story here. I developed that early on. I didn't know it. We all grow up in different parts of the world, different towns. I grew up in a very small town, 4,000 people, called Kimberly, which is right next to where I live now, Twin Falls. And the beauty about living in a small town, Francisco, is the same reason why it stinks is because you know everybody and everybody knows you, right? They know their dog and their cat, their mom and their dad and their cousins, and they know yours. And, you're just one big happy family. And I think what that developed in me looking back was just this sense of support, right? I wanted to, you kind of had to be there. You knew everybody. You couldn't, someone was pulled off on the side of the road in a farm country road. You're going to pull over and see if they need help. That's just how you were taught, and when you're a farm kid, you're working out in the field, when something breaks down or whatnot, you got a few select people that can call, or you just got to figure it out yourself. And I think these things kind of developed who I am and the joy I had for working with other people, living in a small school too. Grades 9 through 12, there was only 350 people. And so if you knew how to pick up a ball and throw it in any direction with some sort of accuracy, you're going to play sports, whether you like it or not. I remember I always begged my coach, I played them all, right? We didn't have baseball in the school, but I had it during the summer. There were 2 weeks of the entire year that I didn't have a practice or a game during that week. And that's just what you did in small towns too, if you're athletic, and I was, so you played a lot of sports. And again, in to my character, I just learned to enjoy being around people. I go to a party or I go to a big event or something like that, people feel drained afterwards. It actually fills my batteries. And I think that comes from being so close with everybody, learning to enjoy and feed off of everybody's energies, right? And then give off your own. And I think that plays a big role in how in business, I turned out to be an outside salesman, if that doesn't shock everybody. and learning how to problem solve with people and leaning on people and having them lean on you. I served a mission for my church when I was 19, and my mission president gave me great advice. He said, Luke, when you get off your mission, you go to work, find your career, always look at your career and whatever it is that you do as a way to serve others. And I didn't appreciate it. I didn't appreciate the advice until in the middle of work, when you realize, it's far better to get up and be excited about going to work when people are relying on you and you're the guy and you need to solve the problems for them and they're counting on you rather than just picking up a paycheck, and I think that all came from small town living.
That's great. So yeah, I mean, just you could tell your formation from that small town, and I love what you said at the very beginning. Was how you're just we kind of joked here and jest that you're just a farm kid from Idaho, but one of the reasons I started this podcast 10 years ago actually was in the line of work I was doing. I worked primarily doing fundraising and development for a nonprofit public policy organization at the time, and based here in Florida. And I would just interface with so many entrepreneurs, so many business people. And I would, if you're good at sales or fundraising or anything, right, you do a little research on your customer or your potential donor, right? In the nonprofit world, what is this person about? Tell me. And then, you go, you have lunch with them, coffee, whatever. And you really kind of peel back the layers because, Luke, we're meeting you right now at your, at a point of success, right? Like, you were on the Mike Rowe podcast because you did something substantial at some point in your life. So a lot of people will meet you at your point of success. And that's the same thing. I was meeting a lot of these business people at what I would consider their point of success. There's somebody who can help me, who can maybe be a supporter of the organization I was working for. But what I really loved was learning their story and going backwards and saying, how did you get here? Yeah. And then I started realizing all the ups and downs and failures and challenges. And yet everybody else from the outside is meeting this person right now and might think, man, they got it all put together. That everything just looks so easy and effortless. It's like watching Roger Federer on a tennis court, right? It's like, how does that look so easy and effortless? Well, it was years of practice, right? And determination and persistence and that's the same thing with every entrepreneur, whether they're in a for-profit business, a nonprofit business. And so I think to you and me, I think we share that sense of like, that's why I started the podcast, right? Because I was like, man, I'm meeting all these people who are just normal everyday people, and they have all these things people can learn from. So let's get them on. And then, over time, right? Now over 165 guests, including you, and just trying to bring more stories like yours. But the other thing I loved what you talked about was the energy that you get around other people. I'm very much that way as well. And some people are not. And by the way, I grew up as the kid who when somebody would come over to the house or a group of people would come over to the house and I was a little kid, I would like run to my room, right? I was like very shy. Who are these people? Yeah. And I think people who know me today would think like the opposite. Like you're so social, you're so, but I think some of these things, they're kind of learned. You kind of got to get out of your comfort zone, get out of the box. But you, anyway, you were a farm kid from Idaho. You went into sales, outside sales. And then tell me, what was the path to starting your nonprofit, Sleep in Heavenly Peace?
You bet. It's funny. I think about, when my parents had friends over, they had a party. I was the kid that did the breakdance lesson in front of all of them. And they,
well, I still will never dance in front of people, if I don't have to. So
I won't either. I kind of went the other way, right? Now, I don't mind being in the back room a little bit to some degree. No, you're right. And here's the thing, Francisco, I learned long ago. I just love to learn the human of them, right? And I have a saying. It's my personal montage of, we're just humans helping humans, right? And when you get right back down to it, we all look at someone like, I don't know, Steve Jobs, right? Can you imagine Steve Jobs in his garage when he was, a teenager or whatever, That's kind of the coolness about making someone human. And it's a beauty because we're all, when it comes down to the common denominator of everything, we're just a bunch of humans out there trying to make it through life and helping each other. So thank you for that. I enjoy the learning the reality of people, you still put people on pedestals because of the things that they accomplish, for sure. But it's also to know that they put their pants on the same way you do, or at least most of them do. Yeah. And so, yeah, I served I served a mission, came home, went to school, got a job, worked at the job for 20 years. But right in the middle of my career, I was about 35. And I don't know, Francisco, if you or I know other people, I can't be the only one, that when you hit this midlife age, 35-ish, right around there, I know people call it a midlife crisis, right? I don't look at it as a crisis for me. I had a great job. I was making good money. I had 3 kids, family. I was coaching football. I was serving in my church as what they called a young men's president. So I still worked with the kids, and it was great. On paper, it was awesome. I couldn't complain at all. But I think you hit this point. I did. I'll just speak for myself. I hit this point in life where I was like, okay, what really does matter here? I've got a good job. I'm making good money. I'm doing all these things I'm supposed to, right? But I just felt, unfulfilled almost. I felt lost. I liked my job. I liked my customers. I liked the people I worked with. That wasn't the problem. I think a lot of it was I measured success my whole life based on the number of zeros I had behind my paycheck, the number of toys and the things I had in my garage, and those slowly just became burdens to me. And I didn't care how much money I made. I was more worried and cared about, other things. What is my purpose here? What is my meaning? How, what kind of almost legacy do I want to leave here? I want to leave this world better than it was, or leave it better than when I first got there, right? And so all these things are kind of going through my head, and they had been for several years, starting in about 2010. And I'm a pretty happy outgoing, farm kid that loves hunting and fishing and all this jazz. And they were losing their luster, and that just wasn't me. So in the middle of this kind of internal turmoil, and I was also losing a lot of faith in my religion. And, when you start questioning all these things, it brings all sorts of questions out that you otherwise just swept under the rug. You kind of face them now, which is great. But it's a hard period of time. And so I'm in the middle of this, and I'm serving with the Boy Scouts. That was the activity arm that we were using for the church and the young men's program. Well, as part of the leader of the Boy Scouts, I'd sit in these meetings every other week, and we'd talk about events that were going on in our community. We'd talk about, the people that we were helping. Well, one family kind of perked my interest because they lived in a part of my town, my very small town, that I didn't even know existed. Like, I didn't know that there was an apartment complex there. And I'd been riding my bike around this place since I was 5,
Wow.
And so I was like, wait a minute, where's this place at? And then one of the leaders had visited the home, and she was telling us kind of the conditions of what the families, the struggles that they have. She was the local school bus driver, so she needed some help getting to school. And, the husband couldn't hold a job. He suffered from some illnesses. And so they were struggling financially, and the kids didn't have any beds, and they needed bikes, they needed clothes, they needed food. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Did you just say the kids don't have any beds? She says, that's right. And I said, well, you mean they got mattresses on the floor or what? And she says, no, they just have blankets and pillows on the hardwood floor. And that just, for whatever reason, I'd like to think everybody got hit the same way I did, but it hit me hard. And, again, going through this internal struggle no one knew about but me, and thinking about my own kids and how horrible that would be for them to sleep on the floor, and any kid sleeping on the floor. Then I thought about my Boy Scouts and every leader out there that's dealing with young men or any age, teenage boy or girl, trying to provide an activity that doesn't involve a screen or a computer or an Xbox or something like that nowadays is kind of hard to do. Well, I thought, here's a great opportunity to teach these boys how to build something, right? I'd never built furniture before in my life, but I wasn't a stranger to tools. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I take these boys and we'll build this family a bunk bed? Because it'd be fun activity. We'll get an Xbox controller out of their hands, put a drill and a sander in it, and teach them how to do something, right? And it also, I wanted them to learn the joy of service, and giving back. And I always say, if you want true joy in life, you got to stop looking at yourself and see how you can help other people. Your problems won't go away. Of course they won't. But what they do, it puts you in a frame of mind, a different perspective where you can maybe look at your problems much differently and realize that this monster, this creature you had in your closet that you're afraid to face and is huge, you open up the door and you realize, hey, you know what? It's not that big. It's not that heavy. So you can deal with them better. And I think that's what service does to people. And so I wanted that for my Boy Scouts. And I also wanted them to appreciate the things that they had. So I went home that night, measured my daughter's bunk bed, and kind of came up with this very simple pattern of how to build this thing because I'd never built one before. So, and then the Boy Scouts, they came over and we built this bunk bed over the next couple of days. Well, it was awesome. And the boys, I was so excited. They were excited. They had fun. They came over a couple of nights when they didn't have to, because they wanted to see this project through. Well, other people found out about it. And it kind of went through the congregation. And the next thing I know, here comes Saturday evening. We're going to deliver this bed. And there's like 30 people show up at my house to deliver this bed. And I said, guys, we can't have Army go over to this 2-bedroom apartment, right? So I stayed back with some other leaders, and I wanted the boys to go experience this, and so they went and delivered this bed. And the next day at church, they just told me how amazing it was. The kids were so happy. I think the Boy Scouts got a good glimpse of what some kids, the conditions that they sleep in. And mission accomplished. I was so excited. I was a little bummed I didn't get to go myself, but it was more about the Boy Scouts and the family, and that was great. Well, life just creeps itself back in, right? The next week you're back on the couch and you're back worrying and wondering what's going on and who am I? And all these, I was slipping back into this rut, right? Well, I was sitting on the couch, and me and my kids were watching Big Bang Theory. That was our favorite program back then. And some commercial come on, and it was about an Xbox or an Xbox game. I don't remember. And this was just right after Thanksgiving, so Christmas was fresh on the kids' minds. And I remember thinking as a parent, don't you dare ask for for another Xbox. And they're kids, of course they're going to ask, right? And it just hit me right, Francisco. It was like, here I'm struggling internally, trying to be a good dad, trying to find my way in life, trying to understand what I'm doing. And I just built a bed for this family. And it was a great experience. I wish I would have got a Psalm. Now my kids are talking about this present that they want, and they've already got one, and they don't have a bed, but my kids have beds. I mean, you know what I'm saying? All of this turmoil was just floating around in my head. And the next thing I knew, I stood up. I started walking to the garage door, and my kids said, Dad, where are you going? And I said, you know what? I've got some leftover wood. I'm going to build another bunk bed, and you're going to come and help me. I wanted my kids to have the same joy, the same experience that the Boy Scouts did, delivering that bed, building it as well, but delivering it. And, the joy of giving back and the joy of appreciating what they had, and in this case, it was my kids, could have been my kids' classmates for all I know, right? So I knew that it was important, and I wanted them to experience that. So we built a bed. The problem was, Francisco, is I had solved child bedlessness. I knew only one family, and we took care of it. So now I got this bunk bed, no idea what to do with it, right? I wanted it to go to a child. I was assuming that this wasn't the only case, but I didn't know of any. And so my wife at the time recommended that I put it on one of those buy, sell, trade Facebook groups, right? Now, keep in mind, this is 14 years ago. I had no idea what these groups were. I didn't know how they worked, right? I wasn't much of a Facebook social media guy. So I put it on there, fully expecting that every Tom, Dick, and Harry is going to want a free bed, right? Well, two things happened that was really shocking to me. The first thing is a whole lot of people made comments on this post. People I'd never known, they were in my community, didn't know who they were, or friends that I hadn't seen for 20 years. Were making comments. That was shocker number one, that there were so many. And the other shocker was that they all knew kids that were sleeping on the floor. And then the conditions, kids on concrete, kids on pallets, kids with 3 or 4 to 1 bed, on couches, just these conditions that was just shocking. I had no idea that was going on in my own hometown.
So what's amazing is you put this on Facebook, and you found that there were a lot of people who knew people with kids that didn't have a bed. But I think the difference that stands out with your story is, as soon as you found out about one, you wanted to do something about it.
Right.
And in fact, you didn't even know if there was another one, and you were thinking, well, I'm ready for the next one, right? You're helping your kids to build a bed, because that must have felt fulfilling, right? Like to be
100%.
able to go and actually. And by the way, the other thing I think is cool about your story and your organization, tell me, like, you're not going out and purchasing beds.
No,
you're also building it. So it's like it's the time and it's the work and it's putting the raw materials together. That's right. I mean, tell me about that process a little bit too, about the building part.
That was a stumbling on, lucky happenstance, whatever you want to call it. I loved working with tools, and so I loved building it. I wanted the experience. I wanted my kids, the Boy Scouts, other volunteers that showed up to my house that winter. I wanted them to feel the experience of building beds. It was cheaper. I'll say it was far cheaper to buy a good sturdy bed, to build a good sturdy bed than it was to buy a cheap bed, right? And I don't know how many, bunk beds, metal bunk beds we went through that just got torn up and broke and stuff. So I wanted something that was going to last a long time. So by gosh, I'm going to build it, right? And what I found was the joy that comes from building it. And this is, I tell people that, and nonprofits out there that might be listening, listen, I'm going to drop a gold nugget at you right now. The volunteer experience needs to be almost as important, if not equally important, as your mission. Because especially with SHP, the volunteers make it happen. If I didn't have volunteers, we wouldn't build a single bed, right? So I learned, first of all, it's not easy what we do. We take raw lumber, 2x4s, 2x6s, 1x4s from usually our national sponsored Lowe's, and we deliver that to anywhere, parking lots, fields, garages, warehouses. And then we bring our tools, and we set these tools up in kind of an assembly line where we work the different pieces of the wood as it comes through the assembly line. And at the end of the assembly line, you have pieces and parts of a bed that then goes into storage and waits for when we go and deliver them. Well, this process of building beds isn't exactly easy. Let me tell you a story if I can. This is my Hank story. So when this is a couple of years down the road, I decided I wanted to do this as a public event, like anybody could come, because what we had was usually just my friends and family. Then we'd have a company that might sponsor it, so just their employees showed up. And I'm like, you know what? I had enough money in the bank to do just a small build, but I wanted everybody in the world that wanted to come to come. Now, this was a warehouse that wasn't very heated. I shouldn't say heated at all. It was the middle of January in Idaho, not exactly a tropical place. And it was Saturday morning. So I'm like, okay, we'll see. I put it in the paper. We'll see who shows up. Well, I was lucky. There's quite a few people that showed up. I was surprised at that. Well, in walks this guy named Hank. Hank's like 900 years old. This guy's an old dude, right? And I'm like, I remember.
I'm sure Hank is appreciating this story. Yes.
Yeah. Well, if he's still alive, hi, how you doing, Hank? I was worried the guy wasn't going to make it through it because it's not, like I said, not a necessarily physically easy thing to do. So he comes walking up, and he had one of those grandpa smiles. You just loved him, right? The minute he looked at you, just had that smile. And he said, "You're the guy, huh?" And I'm like, "Well, sure, yeah. What can I do for you?" And he's like, "Well, where do you need me?" And I said, "Well, tell me what you did for a living." And he says, "Well, I was a carpenter for 40 years." I'm like, okay. I know exactly where to put you. If there's one part of our train of tools and system of building beds you can't screw up, it's cutting wood, And so I took him over to the saw, and plus it's the most dangerous tool we use, right? So usually just an experienced member or someone like Hank that's got an experience with a miter saw that knows how to use it. And sure enough, I mean, the guy, after a couple minutes, he's probably showing me how to do stuff. But I put him on the saw and went to town. Well, the saw is at the very beginning of the train, where when we brand the beds with fire, That's at the very end. So this is the coldest part of the warehouse, by the way.
Wow.
And you're lifting the heaviest pieces of wood because it's not been cut yet. Anyways, it's probably the most physically demanding position in the train. Well, I'm the only guy that knows how to build a bed there, right? And I got 50, 60 people that some of which have never touched a tool in their life. So I'm, of course, running around for hours teaching and coaching and sharing and how to do this and answering questions, all this. Well, 4 hours go by, Francisco. I forgot about Hank. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, is this guy still alive? So I went to the front of the train and there he was, and he was covered in sawdust. I mean, his clothes were as white as his hair. And he looked up at me and I said, Hank, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I've been running around. Well, he wipes off the sawdust off his face, right? And he looks at me real serious. No grandpa smile, just real serious, and just says, Luke, let me tell you something. And I remember thinking, oh crap, here I'm gonna get an earful. He says, I've donated my time and helped out at charity events my whole life. He says, I have never shown up to an event, and in 5 minutes I was put on an assignment, and it was so critical that I don't leave. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I couldn't get a glass of water. People were counting on me. And I remember I was like, man, King, I'm sorry. I should have come and relieved you. And he kind of held up his hand, which kind of, I kind of stepped back a little bit. And he's like, no, thank you. And I just went, it was just such an aha moment to me. At first I was confused. And then I realized, and Hank taught me a very valuable lesson. The happiest volunteer is the sweatiest and the dustiest. And the reason why is because Hank wanted to volunteer like everybody. If you're going to take time to volunteer your time, you want to feel like you did something. You want to feel like it was meaningful. So that volunteer experience, that volunteer fulfillment is so critical for us nonprofits that are trying to keep volunteers, get them to come back, share our message, share our mission, share what they did with everybody else. And that doesn't come from easy work, right? So I tell nonprofits, look, don't make the volunteer experience too easy. I did at first, right? Because I wanted to come back and, oh my gosh, this is hard, and I'll do this for you and I'll run over here, blah, blah. No. I'm taking away all that great opportunity for them to feel the joys of service and fulfillment away from them. And so, yeah, I learned that, the way we build beds is just as important as the people we deliver it to, because that experience for the volunteers is really what builds momentum. It builds interest in our organization, at least from a fulfillment standpoint. And really, we do two things. We bring the community together through service, right? And we build beds for kids, right? Those two things are really our mission. And those are the two things that I found my community and communities all over the country are just starving for.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we know how Hank lives so long. I mean, the guy's a hard worker.
Good point.
Right? That's a good lesson for everybody. Don't shy away from hard work.
That's right.
And stay busy in retirement. I mean, he's definitely, like he said, he was somebody who volunteered probably a lot of things. But I think to your point, I mean, you got people committed to something where they feel like he felt critical to the mission, and the mission is great at the end of the day, right? If you were just showing up and you were doing some administrative work. And by the way, this is a challenge I think a lot of people in nonprofits, like, how can we empower volunteers to do more substantial work? One, I think it also takes training them, like taking the time up front to train them. I mean, I've had a lot of interns over the years, and I think sometimes it could just be giving them busy work, right? And I was like, why would we do that? Like, let me give them work that, like, otherwise I would be doing, right? That would be the best thing. And so, but in order for them to do some of that work, and they, these might be college kids who are only going to be around for 3 or 4 months, sometimes, but I'll tell you what, you empower them, you spend a day or so really focused on, and it'll save you time as maybe the leader of the nonprofit or somebody in more of an employer sort of position. But also because they're going to do so much more work. I got a lot of those interns that would come back semester after semester, and most of those internships were free, but they just felt so like they weren't getting paid. And so they were truly volunteers. So I think, like, to be able to get people to come back, you have to feel like they're doing substantial work. And, maybe for like an intern that's in college or something like that, they might be getting some life skills, building some connections. You're giving them something that they maybe can't get in the classroom. or things
Oh
like
yeah,
that. But
100%.
and then I think in the in the volunteer world, I mean, there are people that want to be, helpful beyond their day, just like you were, you were having this quote unquote midlife crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Really, when I listen to your story, Luke, I hear somebody who, like you said, you were doing things that you liked. You have a family, you have a job you liked. Your life was good. You were a happy guy. But I think what you were doing, you were searching for reinvention. I think that's kind of what I see is like this. There's a constant process of, and also like not in that process of reinvention, of saying like purpose, right? Like I want to do like I want to fulfill. I think a lot of people ask themselves, "Am I fulfilling my full potential?" By the way, I don't think most people don't ask themselves that question.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are not fulfilling their potential, and they should ask themselves that question.
Well,
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but the hardest thing in life, in my opinion, is just being honest with yourself, isn't it? If you could learn to be honest with yourself, right? Really face your demons, instead of having someone reveal it to you and get upset at them and now you're frustrated. But it really just comes down to just being honest with yourself. And you're right. And I think I was hitting this point in my life where I was like, okay, Luke, enough BS, enough of my own mind just trying to wrap myself around things that I already know or I already don't know, or, why not really just be honest with myself and realize, you know what? I don't know what's happening. I don't know if this is really the success that I should measure my life on. And here's the beauty of it, at least for me. The minute you, I don't know, maybe verbally or certainly self-confirm that and you believe that, that's when you're going to find it. Because I think we spend so much time, and I give my talks on these, my keynote talks on these, about following your tiny moments. We spend so much time wanting to change. Deep down, we always want to do better. We always want to have more meaning and more fulfillment. We want to change. There's always something about us we wish we did better. All these things, it's our life. That's just how humans are. But sometimes it doesn't happen. In fact, a lot of times it doesn't happen. And I'm finding out, or I found out, anyways, for me, it's because I spent a lot of time wanting to change. I didn't spend enough time wanting to act on that change.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And, we spend a lot of time meaning practice and thought and work, and we read books, and we spend a lot of time wanting to change. How much time do we spend on wanting to act? Not very much. Because wanting to act, we think it just happens, right? We don't think of it as a practice too. And so when we follow our tiny moments, right, that is part of the practice too, right? And so take for me example, I didn't get off the couch because I knew another child needed a bed. I didn't get off the couch because I wanted to build another bed. I got off the couch because my desire to teach my kids something, I knew it had to be an act. I could tell them, I could show them, I could testify to them, I could show them videos all day long. But until they actually went through the process, felt the quote, quote, slivers and the sawdust in your eyes type thing, until they acted on it, then it wouldn't mean as much to them. And then that's the practice, right, of working on action. So now that I did that, another child showed up, so I built another one. Then 3 more showed up, and I built 3 more. That first year, we built 21 beds. Now, because of what one small get off the couch act turned into, and everybody else has them, now we have built nearly 400,000 beds for kids. And it comes from wanting or increasing our desire to act on our whatever it is, our tiny moments. That's what causes us to change.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of James Clear, Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've read that book, but he's real big into this. I mean, just talking about the small incremental things that we do every day they add up and they compound like interest, right? And then all of a sudden there's a big spike. And I think that's what you're seeing. And when you were doing, you started with one bed, you started with another bed, you then recruited volunteers.
Mhm.
I know that I listened to you on Mike Rowe almost 4 years ago, and I know he referenced that he had that show on Facebook kind of during the pandemic period, returning the favor. They show up to help you, and I guess maybe bring some volunteers, cut a check, these sorts of things. But they, more than anything, that show spotlights you and gives
Right.
you all this attention to millions of people out there.
Yeah.
So
It was the
I know that was
megaphone that we
that
needed.
was
Yeah.
yeah. So I know when maybe it was a year later or something, you went on his podcast, and on that point you said you had gone from 9 chapters. By the way, I want to hear where your chapters are, but your 9 chapters to 309.
Mhm.
I don't know how many chapters you have today. You've built 400,000 bed. That's incredible. But yeah, tell me what is where are all your chapters at,
You bet.
and how can someone either join or start a chapter?
You bet. Yeah, returning the favor was the megaphone that we needed. He gave people like checks or cars or whatever they needed, and we needed a warehouse. We had a pretty rundown warehouse, but the biggest thing he gave us was just the megaphone we needed because no one knows about child bedlessness, even today. Yeah, we since that show, as we speak right now, we've trained over 440 chapters nationwide in
Wow.
4 countries, almost every state. We've built almost 400,000 beds, delivered almost 160,000 beds. I mean, it's grown, and it's grown because people don't realize that child bedlessness is a thing. I'll give you a statistic. And there really is no professional statistics, whatever professional statistics stands for. Statistic that we put together, a farm kid from Idaho, and he's no statistician, but we do know it's greater than 3% of the total population of any given town on average. So if you're in a town of 100,000 people, there's 3,000 kids sleeping on the floor. And the sad reality
Wow.
is, you and I speak right now on our national website, we have over 150,000 kids on our waiting list. And the even sadder reality is and we only cover 28% of the United States right now. So there's still 70% geographically of the United States that they don't even know we exist. These kids don't even know, these families, these social workers don't even know that this need's available to them. So if you're at almost 30% and 150,000 kids, it doesn't take rocket science to realize it's a major need. There's over 12 million kids that live under the poverty line, 18 and under. And vast majority of those, they don't have beds, right? Food, clothing, shelter. Those are the 3 big ones that people focus in on. Unfortunately, beds are a luxury, and that's what I saw when I did my very first delivery. I mean, I delivered my bed to little Haley. She was a 6-year-old girl that had never slept in a bed. She slept in the back seat of her car. And keep in mind, excuse me, I'd never heard of that before, let alone see it. And when I walked into Haley's, they finally got a house. And when I walked into her bedroom, I mean, there's holes in the carpet and tears on the wallpaper, no closet door. I mean, just some shocking things. But the most shocking, you look in the corner and there's a pile of clothes, for crying out loud. And that's where she slept. I was almost upset about it. Haley, I could see Haley coming home from school and putting her PJs on and then sleeping on her school, like shirt for a pillow and pants for a blanket, and then put those same shirt and pants on and go to school the next day. I mean, I was shocked, and the thought went through my mind. And this is what I tell everybody on podcasts or whoever I talk to. Said, listen, just stop what you're doing for a second. If you would, give me 60 seconds. I just want you to think, what would it be like to be a child without a bed? When you wake up in the morning, day in and day out, you wake up, you're sore, you're tired, you didn't sleep well, you're not in a good mood. I mean, they call it waking up on the wrong side of the bed for a reason. I mean, these kids are waking up on the wrong side of whatever. Then they go to school, they're not in a good mood, they don't make good friends, they certainly don't get good grades, so they get hollered at, they're behind, they feel down. That's just the physical side of things and the effects. Think about the mental and emotional side. They come home, they don't have sleepovers. These kids, they don't have friends coming over to stay at their house. So they go to their friends' house. And not only do they have beds, they got throw pillows, for crying out loud. I mean, what kind of message do those kids get from that? And then worst of yet, when we have a hard day, Francisco, boss is rough on us, we lose a client, our friends, we get in a fight or something, whatever, or worse yet, we get the flu, or you get something like COVID. What is the one place on the planet that we all, I don't care who you are, we all just can't wait to crawl into and just escape from the world? It's our bed. And these kids don't have that. And so all these things are going through my head when I saw this first child's bed, this nest of clothes. And then if that wasn't enough just to melt your heart, you look up and here's mom, single mom. And I was raised by a single mom too. 6 years of tears just pouring down this poor lady's face, and I knew what every single one of those tears meant. I'd seen my mom do it. I knew the struggle and the worry and the frustration and the embarrassment, the guilt these parents, these single parents feel when they can't provide what others can for their kids. Bless her heart. She finally got a house. She had food. They have clothes. Those are three big. It's just sad that something as simple and almost mundane as a bed is something that these kids, they just can't afford. And the sad reality too is these kids are in these situations not because of their choices, because of someone else's choices, and not always just the parents too. Child bedless doesn't know geography. It doesn't know economics. It doesn't know culture, religion, race, politics. It doesn't care about any of that. It just knows hardship, heartache, and pain. And these kids experience all of that not because of any of their choices. And that's what makes it so much more personal to me, because we're helping humans that they literally can't help themselves.
Yeah, kids, for sure. And the other thing is, you think about all the kids that are actually in school right now, right? And like they didn't get a good night's sleep because they don't have a bed, right? And probably a lot of other problems that they have to face every day. So if I know your website's shpbeds.org.
Yes.
Sleep in Heavenly Peace, shpbeds.org. If somebody, so first of all, I know people can donate as well, but you
Sure.
probably want them to volunteer too. So there must be some ways that people
100%.
can kind of do that right there on the website.
shpbeds.org. Thank you for bringing that up, Francisco, because the first thing you're going to notice when you go to that website is it's not a big national website, right? We used to have that. We've changed that, and we've wanted to, because this is a local problem. This is not going to be solved for you in your hometown by some farm kid from Idaho, right? I knew that. You know that. We all know that. So we wanted people, when they bring up our website, to see what's going on locally, because that's what we're about. It's just local people, So you're going to see how many kids are on that chapter's waiting list. You're going to see how many they've served. You're going to see events and opportunities to volunteer. You can have a button when you donate. It goes right to that chapter. We pull 10%. We as in the corporate office, if you will, because we got to turn on the lights, if you will, but 90% plus actually stays in your chapter, in that chapter you selected, and helps the kids there. All the beds stay locally. When I started this, I didn't want it to be a nonprofit. No, I shouldn't say I didn't want to. I didn't have any aspirations to be a nonprofit, but I couldn't finance it myself anymore. So I remember thinking, if I'm going to be a nonprofit, by gosh, I'm going to run it the way I think nonprofits should be run. I don't want you to donate your money to some big pie in the sky to help someone that you don't even know clear across the country or even clear across the world, right? There's charities that do that. I want my money to go exactly to the community I want it to go to help and solve the problem for those people in that community, in this case, the kids. So we've set it up that way. On our website, if you know of a child, and this is a big ask, if you know of a child, your own child, your neighbor's kids, or your sister's kids, whatever, 5 states over, you can apply for that child. And hopefully, of the 28%, hopefully, that zip code you enter in is actually accepted by one of our chapter presidents. If it's not, continue to apply. We get chapters every quarter. We put on, 20, 30 chapters every quarter. And as we expand, and if there's not a chapter close by, if you bring up that shpbeds.org and there's not one there, you can start a chapter. If this is something that really pulls at your heartstrings, man, we would love to have you. We need you. This is not going to be solved by me. It's going to be solved by you in your community and your friends coming together to help these little humans, right? And the biggest ask, which is the simplest ask, and probably the most important, we can't fix a problem, Francisco, if we don't know about it. most of you on this listening right now, this might be the very first time you've ever heard of child bedlessness. Certainly, probably as bad as it is. I didn't know, right? I found out child bedlessness was really bad when all of a sudden I was getting called by CASA, Child Protective Services, foster care agencies. I was like their favorite guy because they told me later on, they're like, Luke, you don't understand. Like, finding a bed for a child in these situations is usually the single hardest thing to do because there's no agency that does it. And when I looked to be a nonprofit, I only found one in the entire country 14 years ago that were providing beds for kids. That was it. So yeah, and it's still such an unknown problem. So share this podcast, share what you learned today. You never know. You could be talking to someone in a grocery line about, hey, I heard about this podcast where this organization's building beds for kids because child bedlessness is a big problem. The person behind you might literally have kids on the floor and have no idea that there's this solution out there. So, it just takes us all together, all human beings, all of us come together and trying to help these little humans that need our help.
That's great. Well, I always say every company or organization is a solution to a problem. And so I think the number one, characteristic of an entrepreneur is being a problem solver. And so you are a problem solver. Literally, you saw a problem for one family, you built a bed, and then you were like, well, the solution might be needed for somebody else. I'm going to go build another bed. And then, here you are, 400,000 beds later, 440 chapters later, and yet the problem is still huge. And so, like you said, most people don't even know about the problem, and probably even the kids who have the problem don't know that there's an organization, or their families don't know that there's an organization out there like yours, Sleep in Heavenly Peace, that actually provides these beds. So I think that's great. The other part of, when you were talking about the getting people involved, what came to mind for me was Habitat for Humanity. I mean, they've been around for a long, long time. I remember doing a Habitat for Humanity project, years ago. And the thing that really struck me was, you're literally there, like, bang. I mean, I've never built a house in my life, right? Like, who the heck am I to go on a construction site and build a house on a Saturday with a whole bunch of other strangers and volunteers? And there you are, you're nailing the hammer. And by the way, they have a requirement for the families that get the house that people have to also be participating in building in their own house as well. Right. So I know it's a little different with a kid in a bed, right. But I think it's the same idea that you're doing. It's like you're building something together, and it brings the community together around that. And that's it's amazing when you can build community around a cause. And I think it's amazing. So as you started doing this, Luke, I know this wasn't your full-time job. You had a full-time job, and I mean, you can't possibly continue to scale this on the side. What was the transition like for you? Like, at what point did it reach a tipping point where you're like, I gotta go all in on this and maybe leave my day job?
It was a hard transition, I'll tell you that. Well, yeah. It was and it wasn't. I had a great job. My work was good group of people, and but I always tell the owner of the company, when he had watched me do this for years, right? And now that I've owned many companies and had my own employees, and I better understand where he was coming from when he said, Luke, there's a point in time you just need to make a decision whether you're going to continue doing work, and have, as the owner of his company, he needs employees that are focused in on that. And even though I said I was, even though my work didn't suffer, right, I was still one of the top salesmen. It was vastly being overcome by this interest in my charity. And he saw it even before I saw it, which I'm super grateful for him for, that this was where my heart was. This is where my true happiness was. And so, he basically told me, you need to make a decision, which is hard. I mean, I didn't have another job lined up, but I would rather have slept in a shack, and build beds for kids than not. No matter what the job was. The job didn't matter. It was I was doing what I really felt, because I didn't want to go back into the rut. I didn't want to go back into the hole. Sleep Family Peace saved me from that. and gave me meaning and purpose back. That I'd kill for that, and I think a lot of people will. And so, but it was tough, Yeah, I got hired on by another company just a couple of months later, but for half the pay, and so that was a big struggle. And SHP, I do this full time now, but it was several years before that was able to happen, and that was like 10 years after I started it, so it was a tough transition. But I mean, obviously, I'm lucky to say it was the right one, not just for me, but for literally hundreds of thousands of volunteers that have now been a part of SHP and certainly the 400,000 kids that we're going to serve here shortly. Those are the things I think about once in a while. Had I not got off the couch, had I not decided to quit my job and do this full time, I mean, I don't even want to think about it, because it'd be tough to think about, right? And luckily we don't. Luckily it's moved on, and we've made it through, and the organization's growing like a weed, and which is great. We're helping so many kids and bringing so many more people to the understanding and the knowledge that child bedlessness is real.
Speaking of that growth, I wanted to ask you, and I know maybe you partly answered this before with the way you talked about sort of recruiting and keeping volunteers engaged. But what are some of your best practices for scaling a nonprofit?
Well, number one, I think, I do a little bit of nonprofit consulting with organizations that are either startup or want to vastly grow. You got to remember, you're not the smartest guy in the room, right? And there are bunch of people, millions of people that have a passion like you that can bring a lot to the table. So my management style is I always wanted people that came into the organization that wanted to help. I wanted them to feel just like Hank did. I wanted them to feel like, hey, this is your mission too. And that when people have that kind of ownership, I think skills come out of the woodwork for them. I know it did for me. I mean, I'm not a creative guy at all. I mean, I'm a hardworking farm kid, right? If I got to paint a picture or try to come up with a concept, I'll probably be the last guy to do it. But when it comes to SHP, for whatever reason, thoughts and ideas just flowed like water. And I think that comes from the passion that you give it. And so when you create a nonprofit and you want to scale it, there are volunteers. Find the ones that are most passionate. Skills, sure. I mean, it's good if you want a marketer. If you got someone that's has some marketing background, great. But honestly, whether this is good or not, I would rather find someone that has a strong passion for what we're doing, at least at the beginning, that's going to grow your organization, and be prepared to have that organization be your identity. And there's some I'm going to say danger to it. It's not danger. It's just going to happen, right? There's some things that you need to be aware of when you start an organization that grows and you put your heart and soul in it. That identity becomes fused. You got the corporation or the organization you started, and you got you, and all of a sudden they're one in the same. I mean, 99.9% of the people on the planet that know Luke, they only know me through Sleep and Emily Peace, right? And the very few that know Luke only know Sleep and Emily Peace because of Luke. But those identities are the same. When people start using the words like, oh, your baby, and this is what you've grown, and this is you, and those are all great and true. You've got to have such a commitment and passion for what you're doing to grow it, that your identity is going to fuse no matter what. The problem with that is organizations evolve and people evolve in business. The leadership evolves, but they don't evolve in the same direction. Or I shouldn't say they just don't evolve the same. Businesses grow. They require more leadership. They require management structuring and nonprofit. Board governance strengthening and all these things. Whereas the individual, I went from a farm kid that no one knew about to a CNN hero, to viewed by 10 million people, to on the Today Show and on American Ninja Warrior. I mean, I didn't ask for any of those things, but in a very, very short time, boom, all of a sudden that's happened. That takes time for people to evolve with and understand. And now you're your organization requires more people than you, right? So there's decisions that start happening that you're not a part of that you normally were. This diffusion, this disconnect, this what I call decentralization or diffusion happens is what's called founder syndrome. And we talked a little bit about this before, but founder syndrome is a horrible, but unavoidable situation. Some people can handle it better, but people like me, I think that are driven, that are hard, they're kind of arrogant in a way, competitive, I like to say, you put your heart and soul in it. Well, once it gets and grows past you, even the slightest, that disconnect can be very, very hurtful, very personal, not understandable, And the sad thing is no one knows it but you. No one goes through it but the founder there, right? And or a CEO, or maybe a leadership position that you grew within your organization, and all of a sudden now it's big enough that multiple, this disconnect from what you grew is founder syndrome. And that's a tough thing. What happens in stage 3 of founder syndrome, it's called relevance wound. So am I relevant anymore? I'm not invited to the meetings. I'm not asked my opinion on this. I didn't show up to this event that I normally did, right? I remember one time, this is kind of a personal story, Francisco. We had a huge event. The biggest build event we ever had, 5,000 beds in 24 hours. Huge event. Good Morning America was showing up. It was with our big partner, by the way, that I established, I worked on for 10 years. I mean, you see what I'm doing here? I'm making myself relevant, by the way, and I'm about to get wounded. This is all the real reality, right? Well, the Good Morning America wanted to interview someone. Well, they wanted to interview the executive director. I'm not the executive director anymore. I'm the founder, for crying out loud. Don't you want to, and I didn't get interviewed. Well, I was super happy for a lot of reasons. My buddy got interviewed. I've already been on these shows. It's great. He's moving forward. He represents the organization when it comes to executive director. They select all these things. My organization's bigger and has grown beyond me, which is awesome. Those are all amazing things. That's why it's so hurtful, because it's great, but you tied yourself to it so much, and you had to, that disconnection is just painful. People think it's arrogance, and people think it's pride, and you want all the glory, and it's control. It's really not that. It's, am I relevant to what really saved me? It's kind of
part
like
of your identity. Yeah. Like you said, I mean, it's became part of your identity. And then now it's like outside of your identity, this organization is going, and it's like you said, it's great. It's a product of your success.
Correct.
But now it's got its own identity outside of you. Right.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what you want to see, but it's hard for you as a person, as a human being, to grapple with that.
No question. That's what you want to see. I don't know any organization that starts, any company or founder that starts an organization says, no, I just want to stop right here. We all wanted to grow and grow and grow.
Well, I know a few.
That's called legacy, but no one teaches and helps you understand this founder syndrome problem. And the sad reality is there are many nonprofits, that founders, they're not even a part of their organization anymore. Because the reaction to this disconnect, this relevance wound that they feel, they don't know how to deal with it. And you have to deal with it. It's kind of like, I tell people, it's kind of like let's say your wife has cancer, right? Heaven forbid. Well, she's going through something you don't understand, she can tell you, but what she feels emotionally or thought process, physically, all these things that she's telling you, right? But you don't go through them, so you don't really understand. What you do understand is, okay, she's not reacting very well to this situation, or maybe she's upset or something like that. This is going to change a few things of how she's going to react to things, right? Because that, you can handle that better. That's what happens when boards and nonprofit founders kind of clash, is because they don't understand the situation they're going through. Think about this. If you were like, let's say you did have cancer, you're going through all of these symptoms, you don't know why. So you go to the doctor, and the worst thing that can happen when you go to the doctor is what? Luke, I don't know what's wrong with you. I mean, you come home and you're like, well, crap. something's wrong with me. It's just me. Then you start blaming yourself. This monster that you're dealing with, you can't face it because you don't know what it is. So it just gets bigger and bigger and uglier, and you don't know how to deal with it, blah, blah, blah. Versus if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, no, you have cancer and this is how we're going to deal with it. Whew, now you know. And that's what founder syndrome is. And it's a platform that I'm really excited. I do some coaching on now because there's no coaching out there that I've ever found that would have helped me. And I'll promise you, like many other nonprofits, I didn't know how to handle these really tough, personal, hurtful feelings. And if I hadn't, there's a good chance I'd have been. There's no question I would have caused more problems for the organization than help it. So I should have been kicked out, right? Or would be. And so we don't want that. The organization and the founder, if they can stay together, it's going to be a much more powerful organization in any circumstance. But the founder needs to understand a new role that they'll take. And I have listed out in 5 new roles that founders can take. And it's all building towards the legacy of the organization and doing what you want, which is growing this way past you and growing it to as big as it can be.
Now, Luke, when you coach people on the founder syndrome and these aspects, are you mostly focused on nonprofit founders, or do you also talk to people in the for-profit space?
And that's a great question. Thanks for asking. It really comes down to the first stage of of founder syndrome, which is the build stage. Now, a build stage or a builder, right, can come from all sorts of areas, right? Really, I've seen people that have been a part of an organization, part of a company. They get hired on in their favorite position, whether you're a plant manager or marketing director. You got hired on to your dream job. Right. And so you give your heart and soul to it. Well, you want it to grow. That's your job, right? To make it more successful and blah, blah. And all of a sudden, now there's new department heads and there's new people that take on your task. And guess what? Maybe this one program that you worked up 10 years ago or 5 years ago, the new guy's completely scrapping it. I mean, how does that make you feel? You're like, wait a minute, did I do something wrong? Was it the wrong program? All these things, that's all part of founder syndrome. And it's simply because in some way, big or small, in some way, whatever you built, you've now identified your identity with. You've fused your identity with. So it becomes you. And quite frankly, nonprofits, I think it affects, I'm not going to say more, but maybe more regular, it seems like, because at least for a for-profit company, you can step away and say, hey, I made a lot of money, right? Or
right.
That was part of it. Yeah, an exit strategy, and you can look back and feel successful that way. Granted, still, even CEOs and founders of for-profit companies, my dad's one of them. I mean, he's refusing to retire, because he's just it's been his whole life, his whole identity. When you think of my dad, you think of his organization, and without that, he doesn't even know what to think about himself. And so, yeah, it is anywhere. And I've coached and talked to nonprofits. I've talked to for-profit companies, people that have struggled, sometimes very lightly, sometimes very heavily, but at any stage of this builder, fusion stage, relevant wounds, naming the monster, any of these stages of founder syndrome, all it takes is one really bad, poor reaction to one of your relevance wounds that happens, and it can be oftentimes unrecoverable.
Well, I'm thinking about so let's say the for-profit world, right? This can, like you said, like your father, it can also become part of your identity. Yeah. But I think in this world we're living in today versus maybe the era that your father grew up in, most people are not going to be in the same, not only job, organization, company, right, but they're not even going to be in the same career. Yeah. Because how much technology has just been disrupting the entire workforce, right? So right, the best thing is to be able to understand that and build skills that will be able to transition, build work ethic that will be able to transition into new companies, yeah, and into new types of careers. Yeah. So I think that's kind of maybe one thing, and that would be something for people to really help, have a mindset that they're going to be able to understand like my identity should not always be tied up just in a company, even a company I founded, a company I run. It's great, but maybe in the future that might be a springboard to something else that I do. Whether it might be working for somebody else too, right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of great examples of somebody who founded a company and then sold the company to Google or something, right? And now they're working for Google, right? They're working for somebody else, and maybe they're still working on the project in a different iteration, but they kind of, I guess, had the understanding that, hey, first of all, it was successful, that somebody wanted to buy it, or maybe even in a future that's maybe an alternative future to that, where it's like, hey, technology disrupted this industry, so my company is no longer relevant, right?
Right.
Well, that's even more hurtful.
Yeah,
But
it can be.
I did something during these years. I built skills, I built experiences, I built connections. And how can I move that into something else to provide a livelihood for myself somewhere else and to provide a purpose? So I think that could be like very relevant in the for-profit world.
Yeah.
But also in the nonprofit world, I wanted to ask you a question about sometimes the people that need your help don't know it. So maybe there's somebody else in the organization that sort of maybe thinks, hey, I need you to help my founder over here. But the founder themselves may be so oblivious to the situation. How do you attract the right kind of people? I mean, who actually kind of opts into your founder syndrome coaching?
Well, it's a great question, because much like the example of having a loved one that has cancer, right? That what's happening to them, and let's call it the byproduct, what's happening to them is happening to you, right? An organization, an employee, a boss and a board, a founder and a board, whatever. That's the type of relationship. The coaching's different, right? Because for a founder, it's so much more personal and emotional. And that's the trouble, right? I think when a nonprofit sells to Google, right, there's some ending satisfaction to that, right? I sold it. I did the best. I made a bunch of money. I walked away, or maybe I didn't make any money, but I sold it. I ended the project, right? So your identity, there's no pulling apart of that company. You're still identity fused with it, and it'll never change because the company no longer exists, right? There's some probably different feelings that come from that. But when your organization continues to grow, right, someone takes over, right? I think that's where relevance wounds become very critical. And that's the key is, relevance wounds happen because your identity's fused together, and that pulling apart feels like you're irrelevant anymore. So you get all these wounds. If you don't have that, then you probably won't feel it. When it comes to a board or someone on the other end of that, right, all they see, and this is really difficult, especially in the for-profit world, but all they see is someone that is upset, someone that's emotional, someone that is, just they're not handling this situation very well, right? They're upset and they just want control, and we can do better than they did, but so they too get very defensive. So now you have two defenses that are just fighting each other. When the fact of the matter is, in between that is founder syndrome, and if you both understood that, then you can get back to this, right? Now, I will say a lot of the work is on the founder side, because the board, all the board cares about, and all the board should care about, is the strength of the organization, right? We want it to grow. We want governance to tighten. We want to do what's best for the organization, right? The founder wants that too. But the founder has a much harder task because he's dealing with a lot of the emotional side of things. And emotions, very difficult to control. Kind of goes back to being honest with yourself, right? Mm-hmm. The company doesn't have that. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have board members that may have alternative motives. Those are a different beast to deal with. But still, even if you have that, the founder still needs to eliminate the founder syndrome or the relevance wounds and the effects that you want to say and want to do and want to show, and you feel you need to control that. The first step, what I call the 5 disciplines of leadership evolution, how to deal with your founder syndrome. The first step is pause before you protect, right? Which is the most critical. That example when we were at my big event, right? My buddy's up there doing doing his thing. It was awesome. I was excited for him. I knew what I was struggling with. I was working through it. And then I kid you not, right next to me, one of the board members goes, "Hey, look, we got a new spokesperson for Sleep at Emily Peace." And I mean, you want to talk about a dagger in the back. I mean, I didn't say anything, but I mean, I still kind of get shivers from it because it is an emotion that you hate feeling. You don't want to feel it, but you're going to feel it no matter what you think. So you need to learn how to get through that, right? Not to push it away, not to hide it under the rug, not to put it on the shelf, whatever you want to call it. But you need to deal with that. And that first step is to pause before you protect someone, before you protect yourself, before you think you protect the mission, before you jump in and want to be the problem solver like you have been your entire existence with this organization, right? Just pause, just stop. I had a nonprofit buddy of mine just 2 days ago email me. He says, "Luke," he's like, I have some problems with my board, right? I don't know what to do. I'm feeling it is not good. And so I sent him the 5 disciplines right away. I said, "Listen, first thing, don't do anything. Don't say anything. Just pause for a minute, right? Let's talk." Because those are the moments where, all it takes is one turn of the head and a bad phrase, and it might be something you can't recover from. I think you can recover from anything, but it's going to be a difficult process, right?
Yeah, you're going to create more problems for yourself. Yes.
Correct. Yep. And the sad reality is that, and this is the sum of founder syndrome, no one really teaches specifically what the problem is. There's no doctor out there saying, this is what you have, and this is what we need to do to help you get through it. And that's what I want to bring to the table. I think I've talked to a lot of nonprofits that had they had this, I think they would have been in a much better situation. Friends, CNN heroes of mine, that they're no longer even part of the organization that they were celebrated with 10 or 4, even 8, 9 years ago. And that's really sad. People commit suicide over this kind of stuff, So if that's not,
it goes back to their identity, right? It's like a loss of identity. And when you lose identity, that becomes suicidal to some people, a lot of times, right?
And I think this is where for-profit or nonprofits become more affected because, I mean, let's be real. A lot of people start nonprofits because of a relationship they knew, or someone went through something, or their daughter died from this, or, there's a lot of very, very personal and for me, I was going through some really crappy internal identity crisis, if you will. Sleep at Emily Peace pulled me out of that. Right. So, I mean, I've already shared it with you. It saved my life. Well, how would you like to be separated from something that saved your life? You start feeling like I'm not being saved anymore. Like I wanted this because it helped me create my identity that I'm happy with and I'm pleasure. And now it feels like it's being pulled away. The fact of the matter is, it really is not. I mean, your identity to this organization doesn't necessarily get pulled away. It just changes. And that's the biggest reality is. And the fact that it is changing, I help nonprofits founders realize, or really any CEOs as well, that's good. That means your organization is growing. It means it's healthy. It means you've done your job. And one of the biggest, hardest things to realize is relevance or worth does not have anything to do with need, which means oftentimes you feel like, well, I'm not needed anymore, therefore I'm worthless. And that's so far not true, right? Just because you're not needed doesn't mean that your worth in the organization is lessened, right? And that's hard for a nonprofit. And it's hard it's actually hard for anybody, even a leadership position where you grew the director of marketing position to where it is, and all of a sudden, I don't need you a part of this anymore. I don't need your decisions here, right? That doesn't mean you don't have worth still. And so those are some things that I coach on, and nowadays I think it's becoming even more and more of a problem because they're fusing themselves so tightly because they have so much passion, which they need and they want. And it's good. And it's why it grows, but they just don't know how, when that separation happens, how to deal with it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'll just go back to what I said earlier about, entrepreneurs, being problem solvers. You're now you're solving problems for the problems that the problem solvers have, I guess what you could say. But you also talked about something when you were starting you talked about starting Sleep in Heavenly Peace. You talked about people needing to having this like desire to serve others, or like even just inspiring your kids and the Boy Scouts to want to serve others. And it's interesting because I've put out 2 books, and actually I have a third one coming out by the time this podcast comes out. But they've all been focused on people who interviews, conversations of people I've had on this podcast, and really grouping together. I went through the first 100 episodes of this podcast, and I tried to see what are the like top 10 characteristics that these people have, right? And the first one I came to was problem solver. Then that was in the first book I wrote. The second book I wrote, so the first book was called The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste, right? The second book is called The Heart of the American Dream. Now, what I did in the first book, Luke, is I looked at the 10 characteristics of the mind, really. I mean, it was all focused around building the entrepreneurial mindset. So what I wanted to do in the second book was talk about the heart, and what type of heart does an entrepreneur need to have. And so the first characteristic I came up to, which really is a mirror of the problem-solving mindset you need to have, is that you need to have a heart that is committed to serving others, right?
Yeah.
But also, just that ability that you're committed to others, right? And so this whole focus around the heart is the thing. Like, you need the mindset, you need for all the reasons, but the heart is the thing that's actually going to drive you to get up every day. And you've mentioned this a couple of times. I've actually heard you talk about this. You know, you used putting your heart into it a few times in this conversation. But one of the things that is so challenging then is something you have lived and put your whole heart in, your whole self in, and then all of a sudden yourself may not even be needed in this anymore, right? Or at least not in the role. Like it's evolved. Yep. And so that is also very difficult to like. We have a heart for something because we love it. Like we're going to get up and we're going to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week for,
plugging away
SHP, right? Like whatever the organization or cause is.
Yep.
You just don't even feel like it's work anymore. That's why people are like, why are you working on Saturday? Well, it doesn't feel like work. Yeah. This is just something I love to do.
Talk to my wife.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think like that's thing. But the interesting is then what happens. And again, it was also something that gave you such fulfillment that like it felt like it saved your life.
Correct.
So I think that this is a problem that a lot of founders have, whether nonprofit, for-profit. It's also a problem for their organizations as 100%. Well, not just for themselves.
Yep.
So anyway, I like the fact that here we have somebody who's been successful, not because you got up one day and said, I want to start a nonprofit, but just because you got up one day and you wanted to solve a problem. Yeah. And the nonprofit was the vehicle that ended up emerging to solve that problem the best. Yeah. But now you have this experience and you've looked around and you see a lot of nonprofits that need some help and a lot of people in those nonprofits. So I think that's great. You're now providing another solution. It seems like this is like a constant theme, right? As with somebody that like you, that's a problem solver. It's like, I see a problem, I want to solve it. I see this, I want to solve it. And so, so it's great. And anyway, so how can people connect with you in this realm as well?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And about that too, I think nonprofits, entrepreneurs, right? We always see something. I still to this day, I see something and I'm like, if you did it this way, or if you did it that way, you know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden,
if somebody else doesn't do it, somebody else doesn't do it this way or that way. That's kind of what inspires the person to go do it, right?
Oh man, we're just crazy. We can't. My mind doesn't shut off, right? But I chose to really emphasize on founder syndrome for 2 big reasons. First of all, I was affected by it. I know it would have ruined a good portion of my heart. And number 2, I know there wasn't a lot of people that I know of that coach on this, but I know a lot of people being affected by it. So, and I would do it for free just because that's how much I know it can hurt. And that's how much I know people need it. So listen, I have a website, LukeMickelson.com, very simple, right? My first front of it is my public speaking, keynote speaking. If you want me to come and share a message about following your tiny moments, making passion into purpose, I'm there. But I also have a tab. It's a new one, right? This is only less than a month old. I'm excited about this. It's called FSS, which is my Founder Syndrome Survival Course. there's an assessment on there. You can fill out the assessment. It's just a 18 question right on there. You don't have to go anywhere. It's right on that page. You fill it out, and it'll bring up where you fit in the 5 stages of founder syndrome and how critical that might be. Do that. Go there, lukemickelson.com, find the tab FSS, click on or go to and take the assessment. If this is something that, like, even if nonprofit or for-profit, if you started a company that's growing well and you feel that evolution, business evolution starting to develop, take it. It won't hurt you. You know, it'll at least give you some ideas of maybe where you're at and what's coming. Because I promise you one thing, I guarantee, just like you said, you put your heart in it, right? You have to. If you want to be successful, if you want a good company that's going to grow, it's going to require you putting your heart in it, which means you're going to you're going to fuse with it. That's just going to happen. You can't avoid it. So you will go through founder syndrome at some level or not. So I want you to learn that this diagnosis, if you will, is given to you, and you can now start preparing for that, or at least start trying to understand. At some point, we all say it. Hey, I want this organization bigger. I said it on the micro returning the favor. I know that this is bigger than me. I've known that. And I'm so excited now. Luke Mickelson could die tomorrow and SHP is still going to grow like it is, right? And that is the biggest blessing ever. It's also the worst curse, right? And so to deal with that, that's what I want to help people with. So yeah, lukemickelson.com is my personal website for this course.
And I'll put that in the show notes because that's Mickelson, Mickelson. So
yep. Just like the golf.
That's great. That's right. Yes, Phil.
Like Uncle Phil.
Instead of Phil, it's Luke. And you know, Luke. First, I'm glad you came on the podcast here, and hopefully you're getting on more. But I feel like this needs, like what you've outlined, really needs to be like a TED Talk if you haven't done something like that yet. Because
I get a TED Talk that's just not about this.
Yeah, you need so this is call Ted back up and no, it's because I think this is really great and help a lot. Like you said, not a lot of people will talk about this, but I think also the kind of the people that need it most may not be the ones that identify that they need it most. That's
Correct.
My thought. But this has been fantastic, man.
You hit the nail on the head, and that's I don't want to leave on that great point you just brought up, because I'm one of them. I mean, Listen, we're competitive, right? We're a little arrogant. I think that needs to come with success, right? We can do this because you're relying on yourself so much, right? That's what brings the identity fusion happening, because when a problem comes up, you solve it. When there's an issue, you absorb it. When there's a solution, you came up with it, right? So when it's up to you, it's very difficult to recognize, at least for me, that other people might be experiencing it and you don't know you are. It's hard to accept that, right? And so that's why I made the assessment the way it is because anybody can go through it. And if you go through that assessment, you might realize, oh, I'm actually I'm in the more of the founder or a relevance wound. I'm seeing this, I'm feeling this, and you don't even know it. I didn't know it a year ago. And so you're right. The hardest ones are the ones that don't think they need it. And those are the ones that are usually the most dangerous and will be negatively affected by it the most because they don't think they need it, you know?
Well, it's great. Well, no, this has been really fantastic. You've brought in a lot of energy. We started the conversation talking about energy, and I hope the listener has felt that energy as much as I have across here. And so we'll look forward to hearing and continuing to following your journey. You were just an amazing story on a podcast I listened to 4 years ago, and now I got the opportunity to hear the updates of that story firsthand here on the Agents of Innovation podcast. And so I just want to thank you, Luke, and also everything else you're doing. In addition to that, whether maybe you might have had founder syndrome at some point or not, clearly you have found another case of reinvention and another way to be relevant and be a solution to a lot of people, including people that are in your current situation. But I just want to say, thanks for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast, and thanks for being an agent of innovation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.